Welcome to a phenomenal edition of Rebellion's educational series. I'm here with retired U.S. Army Colonel Dave Fivecoat, former paratrooper, fought in Iraq, seen things I couldn't imagine, here to talk to us today about the war in Ukraine. Dave, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be on Rebellion TV today.
Thank you so much for your service to this country, by the way. Really means a lot, especially seeing the horrors that are going on. I can't imagine the horrors that you have faced yourself.
Well, thanks. I really appreciate you saying that.
So the horrors that Russia has faced near Kiev have been pretty extreme. Were the 3-1 numbers we're hearing about in the press, is that accurate? Were they really just surrounded 3-1, and so taking Kiev was never going to happen?
So when you say surrounded 3-1, do you mean the Russians were outnumbered?
Russians were outnumbered 3-1 in terms of combatants.
I hadn't actually seen that number. But what I did see in and around Kiev is, the Russians were pushing to try to seize Kiev as one of the strategic objectives that they had early in the war. There's quite a distance from the border. So the Russians had to have good logistics to support that offensive to get to Kiev. And that was their first stumbling block. Their first stumbling block was their logistics didn't support that. They struggled with basic sort of maintenance and tires and fuel, all those things that make a modern army run. And then the second thing that they struggled as they pushed towards Ukraine is this idea of combined arms. And you and I talked about that before, but combined arms is this idea of synchronizing and combining really 3 or 4 or even 5 elements of the military all together to achieve one goal. And it's really putting tanks and infantry and artillery and helicopters and fixed wing aviation all working together to achieve one objective. It's not easy. American units struggled to do it. We did it pretty well in the 2003 invasion of Iraq, which I participated in, but there were certain times when we didn't do it so well. But the Russians as a whole struggled with this idea of combined arms. And you see them, you can see the videos coming out of Ukraine where the tanks are operating independently or the infantry personnel carriers are operating independently. And that's where the Ukrainian infantry armed with rocket launchers, javelins, NLAWs, and other advanced rocket launchers are able to pick off tanks and armor personnel carriers because they aren't operating as this combined arms team.
No, intelligence is so important. You look at the most successful special forces raid from Israel's standpoint, and many people's views, the entire world, in Entebbe, you had a plane that was circling the airport the entire time, relaying information down to the ground so that they knew exactly what they were doing. Whereas now, 50 years later, you have Russian troops essentially with no idea, some of them lost apparently.
Yeah, the change in intelligence has been, just like all technology has evolved and changed over the last 20 years. The one thing that I've been watching a lot is this website called Oryx. They're an open source website. It's 5 guys. The lead guy on the website actually wrote a book on the North Korean military. And what they've been doing is they've been going through all sorts of social media and cataloging damaged, destroyed, captured, and abandoned vehicles from both sides. And they do a running tally every day. I just looked at it a couple hours ago, but it's really open source, crowdsourced intelligence, which is way different than even how we fought in 2003 in Iraq or 2010 and 11 in Afghanistan.
What would we have done if the Iraqis had, these javelins? How would our Abrams have? How would we have responded?
Well, the Iraqis had tanks, and the thing that we were able to do was synchronize our fixed wing aviation, which was both Air Force and Navy, along with the rotary wing aviation, which was mainly U.S. Army, to combine them with the tanks and the infantry that were operating together. There were times, and I drove past a blown up Abrams tank on the outskirts of Baghdad. And, if you've ever been in an Abrams tank, it's 70 tons. It drives 60 miles an hour. It feels like it's totally invulnerable. And to actually see one of those knocked out on the side of the road was a little bit alarming. But at least the story went at that point in time in 2003 that the crew all managed to get out safely because the vehicle protected them.
But these T-64s, which have just been obliterated, I mean, the numbers that, Oryx, which you mentioned, put up are close to 43% losses on these T-64s. Are they just built much, just not, they don't have the armor that the Abrams has?
Well, the Russian tanks, there's three main tanks that both sides are using, and it's the T-64, which the original design was 1964, but there's been upgrades on it. The T-72, which was original design 72, but upgrades as well. The T-80, which was a 1980 version, but upgrades as well. And then the T-90, which came out in 1990. All of which are Russian tanks are solidly built, mechanically relatively simple, but they're good tanks. They have low silhouettes, they're rugged, they're reliable. But one of the drawbacks on Russian tanks is, especially in the later versions, in the T-72, T-80s, and T-90s, they keep their ammunition around the base of the turret. And so if the tank takes a hit, that ammunition explodes and blows the turret off and throws it 500 yards away from the tank. Now, with the M1 Abrams,
can the crew survive if the top is blown out or no?
No, that's
Understood.
Almost 100% catastrophic loss.
So that's why we've seen those like Pergoda, like cage apparatuses that have been on some of the Russian tanks.
So the cage apparatus is designed, and it's designed to defeat a certain type of warhead that is on some rockets today. And then the idea is to get the rocket to explode before it hits the main hull of the tank. The Javelin has a couple of ways that gets around it, and that's why they put them on top, because the Javelin comes from the top down through the roof of the tank. And so the idea was to try to get the Javelin to explode early before it hits the hull, and defeat it before it engages the hull.
Understood. So
yeah. Let me circle back to one thing on the M1.
Yes.
The M1 tank actually has a ammunition compartment, and it's designed so if the ammunition gets hit, the ammunition is in the back of the turret, which is the top thing on top of the tank, and it's designed to explode upwards, which with a strong blast door between the ammunition and the crew. So there are stories of Abrams tanks getting hit in the ammunition compartment, but the ammunition compartment works as designed, blows upward, and enables the crew to escape. Now the crew probably walks away with some pretty serious TBI and probably a little bit of deafness going forward, but they at least walk away as compared to the Soviet tanks.
Not to mention the PTSD, but
right.
Yeah. We at Rebellion did a show with Navy SEAL George Hodgen on PTSD, and I know it's a terrible infliction for all of you that have served in these environments. So getting back to the environment, the failure of the Russian tanks has not been the tank itself, but the tactical deployment of Russia not giving the tank its due support, if you will.
Yeah, that's an easy way to put it. Providing all the other parts of the team together to work with the tanks. And if you look at the Russian tank numbers that are lost, they're actually, as of yesterday, there were 450 tanks of T-64, T-72, T-80s, and T-90s lost out of what I think is about 940 that started the campaign. But there's only been 618 armored personnel carriers, which they have a couple different variants. The tracked variant is called a BMP. The one with 8 wheels is called a BTR. And they've lost 618, but you would think if they were operating together that there would be almost a 2-to-1 ratio between lost armored personnel carriers and lost tanks, but it's not at that level yet.
So you really have just seen the Russian army kind of quite dispersed. So I mean, has there been evidence really of good military tactical efficiency by the Russians? Have parts of the forces done well and other parts not? Or would you say it's been a general failure?
I think just looking at the losses, it's clearly a general failure. The next question really is, what does Putin try to do to salvage victory out of the jaws of defeat? I haven't seen anywhere, but there's you see like for instance today Ukrainian ship got hit in the port of Mariupol. You see small victories like that, but as a whole, I would say the Russians have really struggled to do this combined arms warfare.
Yeah. So where do you think Putin will stop? What do you think he has a new goal at this point?
So one of the things that's happening right now is both sides are repositioning. And there's a concept that I talked about today, which is interior lines versus exterior lines. And Ukraine has the advantage because it's closer for them to reposition forces that were around Kiev to the eastern front in and around Donbass and Mariupol. And it takes the Russians a lot longer to go all the way around and get their forces back in there. And so the Russians are operating on exterior lines. The Ukrainians are operating on interior lines. Now, both sides will most likely have to put their tanks or armor personnel carriers on trucks or rail cars in order to move them that long distance. If you drive a tank that far or a APC that far, and I think it's about 1,200 kilometers for the Russians and about 800 for the Ukrainians, the tank or APC is going to need to do some serious maintenance to be able to go into the fight. And so most people put them on a low boy tractor trailer or on a rail car and move them long distance and then get them off and put them into the fight.
I remember hearing once a stat that the average Sherman in World War II had to be put back together like 5.5 times.
Oh, I would definitely believe it, especially if you drove that Sherman from the beaches of Normandy all the way to the Elbe River in Germany.
No, definitely. Well, this is
so I don't know if you saw this fun photo that popped up today in my feed. There was a knocked out Russian BMP, and somebody had spray painted on the side of it Wolverines. And I don't know if you remember the 1980s movie with Patrick Swayze.
Yes, Red Dawn.
Yeah, Red Dawn. And so there's clearly an American, or at least a American film fan out there that spray painted the knocked out Russian armor personnel carrier with Wolverines on it. Just thought that was fun today.
So that was fun. I did enjoy that as well. So when do you see the war ending in the next 6 months to a year, or do you think this will be a multi-year war?
So let's talk a couple historic examples. And I'm a military historian by trade. That's what my degree is in. So the Donbass, which was a war of maneuver like this in 2014, and then basically settled into World War I style trench warfare for the next 6 years, because really it sort of deteriorated into trench warfare in 15 or 16. Could potentially see the war going that way, that nobody is able to generate enough combat power to push either one out. I have seen stuff that shows that that Ukrainian armed forces is slowly pushing the Russians back, even in the east. But there's going to eventually be a point where the sides sort of reach an equilibrium. I don't see this war ending quickly, and even more importantly for your audience, for business, I did a deep dive on sanctions. And if you look at our history on sanctions in both the 1999 war against Serbia and the sanctions against Iraq after they invaded Kuwait in '89, the sanctions stayed in place until both leaders were actually removed. And so for the most part, sanctions were against Iraq from 1990 when they invaded Kuwait until 2003 when Saddam was kicked out. And the sanctions against Serbia were in place from '99 until Milosevic left power in '00. So for the business folks out there, the thing that they need to think about on sanctions wise is these sanctions will probably, even if the war ended today and Russia totally withdrew back to its pre-war boundaries, I believe the sanctions are going to continue at least for another 365 days. And so that reality and that new normal on the business world, I think we're all going to have to factor that in.
So more inflation for a while. Okay.
Yeah.
one of my last questions is on the generals that are getting killed. Why has Ukraine been able to kill so many generals? Are they just not well protected? Do they just travel in, kind of light groups?
Um, so I will say I worked a little bit with the Russians in Bosnia in 2000 or 2001 and 2002, and they have a really top-down hierarchy where the U.S. military prizes its bottom-up initiative and bottom-up adaptability from both the non-commissioned officers, like some of the folks that you've interviewed on the show, and also the junior officers, like the lieutenants and captains that are out there that are able to adapt and improvise when things change.
Yeah.
The Russian structure is very top-down and hierarchical, and really you need a colonel to approve just about everything. And you don't really have this non-commissioned officer corps that really makes some of the Western militaries really so superb, like the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, the US, Germany, all have really strong non-commissioned officer corps. And so one of the things that, in order to solve that problem, if you're a Russian general, you have to go to the front to fix problems, because you've created this structure that isn't flexible, isn't adaptable, and you've got this chaos of war going on. And so they go to the front and get too close to the front lines, and Ukraine has been able to, I think the last count was 8 or 9 generals have been killed in the conflict so far.
It's really amazing, actually watching the failure of Russia and watching 8 or 9 generals die in a month. This whole thing is really just kind of taking the world by storm, if you will. So do you see Ukraine taking back their land in time, or do you think that Russia's able to hold on to a portion?
I think it'll settle. I think Russia's going to at least keep some of the stuff in the east. Not sure how much. Not sure if it'll be enough for Putin to call victory. And so that's what's really, I think, going to come in the next 30 days. We've had this war where they, failed to take Kiev. That sort of resettled back to pre-war boundaries. And now the war is turning to the east. Now, the Ukraine military is not really designed to conduct a vigorous counter-offensive with tanks and APCs, and they're doing a very good job with what they've got. And so I think it settles out. I think Russia will keep some of the Ukraine territory, but I don't think it will be as much as they've got right now, and they're going to continue to lose some until this thing really settles out.
Awesome. Dave, thank you so much for coming out. This was just a great episode, and so much fun learning from you. And I look forward to talking again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really enjoyed this.
You want to show everyone your book so that they can all go out and buy it?
Yeah, I've got a book. It's called Grow Your Grit. It's about how to develop your grit and accomplish your long-range goals, or if you're a leader, how to build a gritty organization that accomplishes its long-range goals. People can find me on the web. You found me, I think, through LinkedIn. I run a blog that is cross-posted on LinkedIn as well.
Awesome. Yeah, well, this was a pleasure, and I look forward to learning more from you in the future, Dave.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye-bye.